So I'll pass the mantle on to him. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnei rā tātou katoa.
Thank you, Janet. Righty-ho, so let's get on to the main course of our feast today. And our speaker, Jim Bolger, was appointed the chair of the Coastal Advisory Panel back in April of 2021. And there are currently 10 other panel members with backgrounds including climate change research, law, Indigenous iwi knowledge, community volunteering, community engagement, senior government leadership, business consultancy, education, and a university science student. Right Honourable Jim Bolger was Prime Minister of New Zealand from October 1990 to December 1997, and during his 25-year career in politics, he led the National Party for almost 12 years, as a minister for 16 years, and had 3 consecutive terms as the country's head of government. Jim holds New Zealand's top award as a member of the Order of New Zealand and is a former ambassador to the United States. He's currently the chairman of the International Advisory Board of the World Agricultural Forum and the Gas Industry Company. He also is a member of the Te Urewera Board and a treaty negotiations consultant. Previously has held positions as Chancellor of the University of Waikato, Chairman of Mount Cook Alpine Salmon, NZ Post, Kiwi Bank and Kiwi Rail. Jim is a local, Waikanai. In fact, he lives just beside the Waikanai Golf Club, and we wave to him as we go down the 14th green. Hand over now to Jim for approximately 20 minutes, and then we'll have time for some questions afterwards. Right Honourable Jim Bolger.
Thank you for the introduction. 1 or 2 corrections to be made, but some of the things I'm not doing anymore that were read out, not his fault at all. Good morning all. Thank you for coming out on what is a quite cool morning. The growing warmth of the world hasn't quite hit us yet. I'll cover the work of CAP as invited to do so, and I want to acknowledge first of all the Mayor. Thank you for being with us this morning, Janet, Deputy Mayor, councillors. I see, is that better? And everybody here? I think so. Okay, thank you. And councillors, I should also acknowledge the man who hopes to get into politics in a few weeks, Tim Costley. Thank you, Tim, for being here as well. So greetings all. As I said, thank you for coming out on a cool winter's morning. I have been asked to talk about the work of the Coastal Advisory Panel, CAP. You've just heard a description of the members. Of course, it also has, he didn't add, a former Governor General as one of the members there as well. We do have a world-class climate scientist who helped draft the UN report, etc. Oh, and one former Prime Minister as well. I want to draw your attention to the word advisory, to remind you that our work in due course is to advise the Kāpiti Council on policies related to our coastal region. The CAP doesn't make or implement policy. Our role is to offer advice. Some critics in the community seem to believe that our role is to close down the community, whereas I see our role as to provide advice on how we can all continue to live in this beautiful community on the coast. But we have to be realistic. The climate is changing. This morning's news was lead. Those who listened to it was the hottest July in history across the world. The hottest July in history. We can't ignore such silences and pretend it's not happening. Or we can face reality and accept that some change is almost certainly necessary. This morning I won't seek to advance arguments that climate change is happening, because if you haven't worked that out after watching the many graphic weather-related events on television, nothing I say this morning will persuade you. So I know that. The UN Secretary General at the recent COP27 meeting in Egypt was reported last November as saying that, quote, "We are on the highway to climate hell with our foot still on the accelerator," close the quote. The Kāpiti Council here, our council, didn't wait for the highway to hell speech from the UN before setting up the Coastal Advisory Panel, CAP. This morning, as has been noted, I've been asked to chat a little about the work and responsibility of CAP, which was established by the previous Kāpiti Council to provide advice to Council on what steps they might, should take to reduce the impact of our changing climate on our community, especially as it relates to the implications of sea level rise in the coastal community like Kāpiti Coast. Looking out at the many dramatic climate-related events across New Zealand and across the world, it was certainly an appropriate time to establish a group like CAP, to reach out to the community, talk to our citizens about their concerns, and importantly, to listen to the community. So first let me say that listening to the community, to hear their concerns about the possible impacts of climate change on our home here on the beautiful Kāpiti Coast is a key objective of CAP, but we are also mandated to offer advice to Council. You will all be aware that when confronting big societal changes, of the desirability of engaging with the community and to, as far as possible, to bring the community along with you. Climate change will inevitably require a challenging journey of transition from yesterday to today's world and on to a different tomorrow. Whether we look at climate events at home or across the world, there is one obvious conclusion, and that is that the extremes in winter and summer are getting more extreme, and we should prepare on this morning's news for that trend to continue. Reflect for just a moment that over 70% of the Earth's surface is covered by oceans, 70%. And yet the vast majority have not been mapped or explored. But according to an article in the New York Times newsletter last week, the oceans are at the hottest they have been in recorded history by a large margin. And man-made climate change is to blame. Delegates from very many countries have gathered to discuss and debate the implications of climate change on the world community, and most importantly, what further steps should be taken to reduce greenhouse gas emissions across the world. Any cynicism you may have is understood. As we all know of the many conferences that have been held and the many words spoken and the many commitments made to take steps to reduce global warming, unfortunately, there is little evidence that real substantive steps are being taken. That said, there are countries in Europe that are mandating, for example, electric vehicles to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions. In New Zealand, we have yet to take such steps, but you might like to have question time to discuss whether such steps should be taken to reduce emissions. Instead, we are more likely to go the other way. For example, US President Biden a few months back made a special trip to Saudi Arabia to urge them to increase oil production to help keep oil prices down, because that's what the public wanted, and there was no mention of the inevitable damage to the environment. UK Prime Minister a few days back gave a commitment to open up more oil fields so as to pump more oil. Money is clearly winning over climate science. Here at home in New Zealand, taxes were reduced on fossil fuels for the same purpose, to keep travel prices down so that people don't have to alter their travel habits. When from a climate perspective, we must change our travel habits. Also recall that last year New Zealand imported over 1 million tonnes of dirty coal from Indonesia to keep our lights on over winter. In a similar space, last November, the Don Post reports that 9 out of 10 Australians, our friends, want their government to intervene to keep gas prices down and impose a windfall tax. My point being that we want government actions to support our current lifestyle. Understandable. Whereas to reduce greenhouse gases and keep global warming under the 2% we talk about, which is the stated intent, we must change our current lifestyle. We must accept change. That is the number one message I want you to take away from my remarks this morning. A few days back, July the 20th, our local daily newspaper, called The Post now, referring to CAP, ran the headline, "Fighting them on the beaches." You probably all saw it. I've never seen a more ridiculous headline. Fighting them on the beaches. I can assure you that the CAP has no intention of fighting anyone on the beaches or anywhere else. We're all relatively mature. We will push back on misinformation where we see it and seek to keep accurate information in front of our fellow Kāpiti citizens. Some optimists, and I run into them as you do, hope that global warming won't be too bad because we humans are rational people and we will take the steps needed to drastically slow global warming and therefore avoid sea level rise. From that perspective, there is no need to get excited about coastal erosion or coastal inundation and the possible need to eventually withdraw from certain coastal areas. Whereas from my perspective, we can't just rely on simplistic hopes that all will be well. We must take the steps needed to ensure that our community is protected as far as possible. We here on the Kāpiti Coast can't change the world, make no pretense, but we can and should prepare as best we can here on the coast and in other councils, of course, for the change that we know is happening. We know is happening. CAP are looking at 5 broad options to respond to the changing coast. 1, enhance. We maintain and improve what we're already doing to protect the coast. For example, enhance existing erosion protection structures that are already there or put there in earlier generation. 2, we live with the hazard. In other words, again, an example that is cited is you lift the floor levels of buildings or have relocatable buildings. Not so good. 3, we keep the hazard away with stop banks or hard engineering. And there's some examples of that on the coast. Retreat, move away from the hazard. And the 5th, the most important, and I've had a chat with our mayor on it, to avoid building in the wrong place. Going forward, nothing could be more obvious than that we don't build in the wrong place. Those are just a few suggestions you may wish to follow up. Every situation will be different, but there will be many broadly similar situations. Let me remind you, you were possibly in attendance when back in July 22 last year, the issue of the impact of climate change on communities was discussed at Local Government New Zealand Conference. Radio New Zealand reported that the Minister of Local Government, Nanaia Mahuta, as saying, quote, "Managed retreat conversations were necessary," close the quote. Reflect as citizens of the coast on the implications of managed retreat in your own situation. In many instances, it won't be good. Napier Mayor Kirsten Wise was quoted as saying, quote, "People in high-risk zones needed to start being told that they could not continue being supported to stay where they were. Something," she said, "that would absolutely need the support of central government." Well, I certainly agree with the last one. The reason that I dropped those quotes into my remarks from 2 people close to the issue this morning, they confirm that councils and coastal society in general will have to confront some huge issues going forward. Let me repeat the Minister's comment that, quote, "managed retreat conversations were necessary." That statement has big implications for all councils with coastal boundaries, and it means they will need to be prepared to take some big and often controversial decisions in the future to protect their communities. So it's going to be some challenging discussions, challenging decisions, and just express some sympathy for your council, because it won't be easy. It is versions of that the CAP is having with the community, or those discussions with the community groups as our outreach continues. As citizens, we know that the Minister's statement in terms of coastal communities is huge. But the first question that CAP will receive is who's going to pay. That was missing from the Minister's remarks. You all noted that. Until the last few days when the government, when addressing how to repair the damage from the houses red stickered after Cyclone Gabrielle. It appears that the government is prepared to put up 50% of the replacement cost of homes ruined by Cyclone Gabrielle. So I would expect something similar if houses were rendered uninhabitable by sea level rise. But that's just speculation. I've not heard that. The role of central government will play in both preparing the community for change and what funding support will be made available is of crucial importance to individuals, but equally of crucial importance to local councils. So at the moment, CAP and councils are in effect exploring the local implications of, say, sea level rise and subsequent coastal erosion, because the implications are both individual to homeowners and to the community in terms of services provided by councils, roads, water systems, sewage systems, etc. Let me return to the COP27 meeting that was held a few months back and draw your attention to a new and emerging issue, and that is the growing demands from many developing countries for compensation from developed countries, which we are one, who collectively have generated the vast majority of greenhouse gases that are causing our climate to change and sea levels to rise. In other words, they're looking at us in the developed world and said, well, it's mostly your decisions and your industries that have caused this. We need compensation. That debate will carry on for some time. In that space, the New Zealand government a few months back announced that it set aside 20 million to assist our island neighbours to the north respond to climate change. Yes, a start, but only a fraction of the money that the government received from the taxes levied on the fossil fuel industry, and only a fraction of the profit that the oil companies have made on selling the fuels that cause global warming. Reflect on that, where the money is gone. Reflect on that for a moment. Billions of dollars are collected from the sale of fossil fuels, either in taxes or profits, but only a very small fraction of that windfall is spent on remedial action to adjust to the damage caused by climate change. My advice to councils is to be outspoken in your request for financial assistance to help your communities adjust to the changes they face because of climate change. And a much bigger issue than money, as sea levels rise and homes and livelihoods are lost, is the inevitable increase in the number of climate refugees, as we call them, looking for a home. We again see them on television. Again, we see a version of this on our screens most nights. As desperate people travel the oceans to seek a home, New Zealand, I suggest, must be prepared to step up and be prepared to offer some such refugees a home. This could be a challenge for some communities who have traditionally been reluctant to offer strangers a home. But going forward, we must be open to such developments, in my view. I will leave that thought with you, and we can discuss it later at question time if necessary. I will now update you on the work and responsibility of CAP, which I chair, and I can advise that the CAP are a hard-working, committed team of fellow citizens who live on the coast here, close to the water, includes a former Governor-General, as I said, former PM, and a world-ranked climate scientist, and it's been good to work alongside. CAP, first of all, is an advisory body, as I've said, appointed to advise council after engaging with the local community. But that important bit is after engaging with the local community and getting their feedback on community concerns, ideas and suggestions on what response our council should implement. CAP is providing opportunities for community engagement by setting up weekend markets and coastal malls, and special meetings, etc. And of course, CAP has an online presence as well. We invite all to come along and have a chat, share their knowledge, suggestions and their concerns with us. Secondly, we also received a request recently, or it's a different one, to visit a coastal area that seems to have inland water that is much higher than usual, further up the coast. I'm not sure where that fits into CAP's responsibilities, to be honest, but a few of us went along to talk to the owner again, listening to the concerns. In the last 12 months, CAP members have had a number of workshops with the Technical Advisory Group, because we want to keep abreast with where the technology is going, and the Technical Advisory Group to see what's happening in that space. Because we accept that we on the Kāpiti Coast are not alone with these issues. They're both New Zealand-wide and international. As mentioned earlier, this is a world issue. Some seem to see that as reason to do little or nothing. Others will try and avoid the issue by pointing out that not all science is identical. In this area, and again, New Zealand should just wait, therefore. Whereas from my reading, the world has a consensus. And that consensus is that the world is not doing enough to mitigate global warming and sea level rise. The CAP is engaged in what could be about a 2-year task of listening to the public and, where possible, answering their inquiries. But we won't and can't have an answer for all the questions. We have started working on detailed assessments of what might be the best adaptation for 5 areas of our coast. Otaki in the north, and then we move to Waikanai, Paraparaumu, Raumati, Paikakariki, and a special coastal area, which of course the Queen Elizabeth Park. We've divided the coast into 5 areas because the conditions are different in each area. For example, there are already aging seawalls on the south to hold back the tide, which of course reinforces the point that this is not the first time our community has addressed the issue of rising sea levels and had the courage to take the steps deemed necessary at that time to protect homes and community. The process going forward is that there will be a series of further feedback and input sessions over the next few months. This is to provide further opportunities for the community to engage with CAP on possible options before CAP makes any final recommendations to the Kāpiti Council. Relatively early next year is our planning. Then the Council will either accept, modify, or reject. Our job is only to offer informed advice. For completeness' sake, I should say that carbon capture has emerged in recent times as a possible valuable tool to reduce carbon in the atmosphere, and we will be certainly monitoring developments in that area of science. With the election of a new mayor in front of me and council, and the appointment of a new council chief executive, the CAP will be reporting to a different council from the one that appointed it. I'm not going to speculate what that change and possible other changes might mean, like a new government in October, for example, may have on the work of CAP. I can just report that CAP will continue with our work and our engagement. Let me conclude this morning with a little history. My first speech to the community here on the coast was shortly after we arrived 10 years or so back. And that was after there had been a change of mayor and council following that election. Preparing for the impact of climate change was a big, divisive issue 10 years back. I observed to that audience that while the council had changed and indicative lines had been removed from maps, which most welcomed, but I said I had some bad news. I told that meeting the bad news was that oceans don't follow elections. They don't read maps. They are indifferent to maps. They come when they come. With that thought in mind, I told that meeting 10 years ago that I thought it was better to prepare for warming oceans, rising tides, and possible coastal inundation. And that's part of the reason I agreed to be part of the Coastal Advisory Panel. I also reminded that meeting that insurance companies and banks do read climate reports and would and are developing their response to minimise their exposure to climate risk. From my perspective, it is always better to prepare, to study the science, seek advice, and have the courage to make difficult decisions when necessary. That, ladies and gentlemen, is is what we on the Kāpiti Coast and every other coastal community will need to do going forward. To be prepared to take difficult and often controversial decisions to respond to our changing climate. And I hope the work and report of CAP will help the correct decisions to be made. That's our goal. Thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to accept questions. Thank you very much.
I'm sure there are going to be some questions, so if you do have a question, could you just raise your hand and we'll get a microphone to you, and then you can ask your question of Jim. So, any questions? Don't be shy. Yes. Well, one of you. Hang on, wait for the microphone.
Thanks very much for that, Jim. Simon Black, on the Aotaki Community Board. We had a meeting yesterday with the Climate Committee, and we're talking about EVs, replacing the council fleet with EVs. And I'm saying that the categories 1 to 6, which they've published, don't take into account the whole life cycle of digging up the earth to get the resources for a car, and the recycling of batteries, which I don't believe there's a full process there. So I'm just wondering what your opinion is on whether EVs are the saviour and whether we should be buying them at the moment.
I don't know the technology to the extent you probably discussed it yesterday. I don't know on that. But on the straightforward, upfront observation and evidence, I would suggest that EVs are the way to go. I mean, I know there's been some excitement in recent days about one that caught fire somewhere and so forth, but we're going to see more work done on shore, not by CAP but by others in this space. But there's an awful lot of EVs across the world now. New Zealand only has a small fraction of them. And I see big countries in Europe are certainly mandating various organisations to have EVs. So my suggestion would be that that's almost certainly one of the ways we'll be going. We, New Zealand, will go.
Go, Martin.
Oh, thank you, Jim. Thank you, Jim. I have I found your presentation rather informative, and thank you for coming to speak to us. The one part that actually just worries me slightly. You mentioned a few times about engaging the community, listening to the community, and as being a member of the Paraparaumu ward, I wasn't actually at any point made aware of any meetings or engagement that there was with CAP and the community. Can you just help me understand how that communication actually works? Because it's a little bit disconcerting that community members, I have a business in this zone, in this area, and I wasn't aware that it was actually in threat from the coastal sea level rise. Could you help me understand that communication with or notifying the community about these
Looking at
meetings that you got?
the number that attended the meeting at Raumati a few days back, awful lot of people got to be hear about it or attended because there was very large attendance. In fact, the bowling club couldn't fit them all in, and a lot had to leave before we really started. So a lot of that work is done though by a very able young woman at the Kāpiti Council to reach out, but a lot of that sort of information is knowledge that goes through the community. We're not trying to contact every person with some personal invite. We're just trying to be available. I've said this many times, that the community knows we're available, and we try and answer questions. Yep.
I'm sorry, Jim. That Raumati meeting was for the Raumati ward. I'm in the Paraparaumu ward.
Oh God, we don't have that sort of an argument, do we? That you can't cross the borderline?
No, I was
Newspaper.
Can I just say something? Sorry. So council, I'll just say something because council is helping with the comms around the coastal adaptation panel.
Yeah, so council is helping with that communication. And we have heard that a number of people haven't heard about the meeting, so there's quite a lot more to go. So for the future, we're looking at how we can roll out more communications and fill some of those gaps, because we have had that feedback. So we are working on it. Just wanted to say that.
Thanks, Janet.
I had to write mine down, sorry, but I'm a bit nervous speaking. But I do have a question. Thank you, Mr. Bolger, for your presentation. And I see what a huge undertaking this has been on behalf of the community. I apologise, but after hearing your presentation, I have to ask what this has cost the ratepayers, the consultants, the panel, the engagement process, the panel meeting, etc. Please.
I can't tell you, because I don't sanction any of the bills or any of those sorts of things. Council has a lot of advisors that work to council. Some of their work comes across to us, of course, as far as that goes, but I really do not have that figure at all. I can't help it. I'm sorry. I don't know whether the mayor wants to stand up or offer anything.
I don't have the figures.
No, she won't have that figure either. I mean, yeah, I'll take your second question, because you obviously want to give me one.
You know how much this is costing?
I would think, looking at the issue, the cost of consultant or CAP will be a small part of the cost. You think about it. No, I can't tell you that because I don't have it. I'll tell you if I had it. I'm not hiding anything.
What she's asking for is if they could be taken offline.
Can I just say something?
Find out.
I can respond to that. That's really cat issue.
Thanks for the question. Chief Executive Darren Edwards at Council. So CAP is an advisory panel and there to engage with our communities, provide feedback, recommendations to the council. As the council officers, we fund everything that operates through the council. So happy to share with you the long-term plan, annual report, which will highlight all that. If you want to know now the actual figure, then even I can't give you that. What I can say is it's budgeted and it is allocated for the work that we're doing and more than that this year.
What's the budget?
You have an estimate or?
Darren, if it is budgeted, what is it budgeted at?
The budget sits for the complete project, which runs over 2 long-term plans, $1 million.
Right.
2 years.
I suggest if you like to the questioner that she calls and talks to the council and so forth, but I just don't have them here. I mean, I'm sure council are not trying to hide anything.
Have you share more information with the email of the office? I don't know.
Yeah.
And just to clarify, that's the budget. It's not the spend. It's the budget.
John.
Thanks, Jim, for the great presentation this morning. I think an answer to that question might more appropriately be, what's the cost of not doing what we're doing? In terms
Thanks, John. I agree with you. Somebody in the back, Alderman.
Yeah, Madam Jim. I just wanted to point out that the pathways recommendation document we've been presenting back to the community is an excellent one for discussion purposes. Found it really useful. However, we've made the point a couple of times now, I think, that the inland flooding you referred to earlier, the groundwater issue, is not yet included in the work that the panel is doing, despite the immense amount of feedback on that topic, that subject rather, during the whole period of your information gathering. Is there any way at all that can convince you or the council to include groundwater in the final recommendations? Because it's a clear and present danger, not 1 to 10 years.
As I said in my remarks, we went and inspected an area of the coast that had high local water, if I put it that way, which wasn't really considered to be coastal in the initial stages when we were set up. And we're just working our way forward on that. We are aware there is an issue there. Some of that, the locals would say, is because council hasn't, and that includes the Greater Wellington Council, haven't kept the drainage systems as clean as they used to, and those sort of things. I have no idea whether, I just don't know, whether that's true or not. But, so we haven't thrown it out or anything like that. We haven't dismissed it. And I have to say, climate scientist on the panel, Martin Manning, has certainly got a keen interest in that area of the issues or the problems as far as that goes. So we're not walking away from it as far as that goes. So we will come with something. What it will be, I'm not going to speculate just at the moment.
Over the far right.
Hi folks, my name's Sean Rush. I'm the ACT Party candidate I'm waiting for Tim to leave, standing up. I also am the only politician I know of who's got a Masters in Climate Change Science and Policy, so I've studied this stuff. Jim, in the 10 years since you've been here, the Wellington Harbour tide gauge records no increase in sea level because the land around us is actually moving up over time. How is CAP taking into account the periodic uplift that ameliorates the worst effects of sea level rise?
Aware of it, talk about it, haven't produced any conclusions whatsoever. But the point I'd make to the wider audience is that across the world, not only across New Zealand, as we are studying the oceans more carefully, we are finding various things like sea level. Land rise is also impacting on what is happening to communities across the world, not only New Zealand. So the point raised is a valid one. There's nothing wrong. That's absolutely a valid point. So at the end of the day, we're going to have to try and balance some of those factors and see what we reach in way of conclusions. It's not going to be easy, and I think I said earlier, I don't pretend that we'll have all the answers either. But the world is looking at this. This is not just one country, one region, one council. We all have issues with the climate as we move forward, and that's really where it's at.
One last question, please, if anyone wishes to speak.
One straight down in front of me, I can see.
Jim, you've been referring to international studies and things. Have there been any reference studies for what's been projected in the past to what has actually happened over the last 100 years on the Kāpiti Coast? Have they been validated as to saying, well, 100 years ago they said it's going to rise, or 50 years ago they said it's going to rise? Has it actually risen that much here on the Kāpiti Coast?
I don't have that data at all. I don't know whether it exists, to be perfectly honest. And you were sceptical about it. Obviously, the questions out of that. And that's fine.
I questions all.
What's that?
I question everything.
Oh, well, good on you. Good on you. I can't give you an answer to that because I've seen no doubt of that.
Jim, the council produced these. I think it's very good reading to understand what's actually happening.
Stand up a bit. So that he.
Yeah, they're actually covers the study for each of our beaches, and I think they're available. I picked them up in the council office or the library. And it was very interesting reading to see exactly what has happened and what the projections are. And you'll obviously find there'll be high projections for stuff that's going to be really bad, low projections. And I think we've got to wait and see, and I think I'd like to see Jim's panel's report and just have a look at what's really going on, because there's a lot of misinformation, both on the positive side and the negative side. And I've been studying this myself for the last 10 years, and I really feel we're getting closer, and I really appreciate what Jim's doing, but we can't be bamboozled into this. We have to take a really serious approach and look at what's really going on. So I commend you, go grab those, and it's interesting reading. Right?
Thank you for that. I think the other point that you made is valid, that we have to be serious in addressing the issue in the science. What else can we do? Right, there's one more question over here, I believe.
Thank you. Actually, I just want to talk a little bit more about your question because it's got me curious. About, sorry, I'm just a bit nervous. Sorry, I feel my heart rate going. Oh.
He's scary, Jim.
That's right, I get nervous every time.
This question,
Oh,
I'm curious.
I might have to wait a second actually. Oh, maybe we should move on. Oh.
You're making it harder for him. Okay, is there one other question from somewhere? And then we'll, I think you're coming to the end.
Kia ora, thank you. My name is Catherine Moody. I teach planning at Massey University. And so I'm interested in this from a planner's practical point of view. And I tend to be really concerned whenever my community is concerned. And I can see this community really concerned. I really appreciate what you said, Mr. Bolger, about the fact that banks and insurance companies read reports. Now, the important thing is that that report has to be as scientifically accurate as it can possibly be. And your technical advisory group are recommending a scenario, an IPCC scenario, that the IPCC itself has said is, quote, implausible. Why would you want to make these people suffer mortgage stress, insurance stress, over a scenario on sea level rise that is implausible?
I have nothing to do with coast, nothing to do with water. I have, of course, addressed umpteen audiences, listened to umpteen questions, and there's clearly some in this community who don't believe some of the science that's been used. That's become clear. We have to try as best possible to get what is the accepted top-line science. I said earlier we have on the panel one of them, Professor Martin Manning, who helped draft the first report for the UN. And you know, we don't rely only on Martin, I'm just using that as an example. We're not sort of all totally equal. So we're trying to find the best science, totally agree with the principle, the science that's got most support, but I equally know from my experience in life, in public life, that there are people who don't believe science.
I'm talking about the IPCC. The thing is, Mr. Bolger, the world has moved on since Martin Manning was involved in climate science. And what they've done is they've moved on from RCP 8.5 and said it is entirely implausible. That's the, you know, this is the science that guides the world. And your panel isn't listening to it.
Oh, I wouldn't debate on that at all, to be honest. I think we shouldn't sort of get into a debate on my science is better than your science approach.
Oh,
I think
I'm
we have to.
talking about the international science.
Well, well, obviously, the council, which provides us with support as well, they're looking at all the international stuff. Nobody, let's be quite honest, nobody wants to do more than we have to do. Nobody wants to ask people to move out of their homes and go back up on the hills or something. Nobody's interested in that. What we're interested in is having a safe community for everybody to live in. It's simple as that. Complex, that is, but it's as simple as that. And that's what we'll continue to try and do. And we'll listen to the community as we go forward on that. And I think that's about where I can leave it. I see somebody coming up on my left, telling me that we've gone on too long already. So thank you everybody for coming this morning, and for those who put their questions up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, thanks Jim. And thank you everybody for attending and all those questions. And I really do encourage you to reach out to CAP and to ask your questions if you didn't have that today, and to participate in the discussion, because it is really big, and you know, these decisions won't get made overnight, but it is really important that we make the right decisions for our community. So now I'd like to invite out Jeffy, who's representing Electra today, the sustainability lead with Electra, and he will also have another little announcement in regards to EVs that Electra Business Breakfast is working with Electra on as well. So,
Good morning, everyone. That was quite a riveting talk. Neil used to give these thank you speeches, so it's an honor for me to be up here given the privilege of expressing our thanks to the Right Honourable Jim Bolger. My name is Jeffy, and I'm the Sustainability Lead at Electra, a position that came up because of the vast impact of climate change, especially within our region. Thank you, Jim, for that eye-opening conversation. These are the realities that we now have to deal with. And a few decades ago, warnings of climate change were taken as folktales, children's bad bedtime stories. And today, it's the realities which we have to plan our lives and our communities around. It's a scary thought to think about. In the jargon of climate change and global warming, there are two main streams: mitigation and adaptation. Adaptation is exactly what Jim was talking about right now. The environment has changed. The climate has changed, and we need to adapt to these changes or we risk severe consequences. Mitigation means reducing our impact on the environment so that we can slow down climate change. It's mainly done through reducing our greenhouse gas emissions and making a positive impact on the environment. And when the talk of climate change began, we thought we could probably just get away with mitigation, reduce our emissions. The climate won't change too much. We can still live where and how we wanted to. But we've gone too far down the line of being a polluting society without really thinking about the consequences. And now it's come to a stage where we have to do both mitigation and adaptation. And Electra, we've recognized this. So we have committed to net zero emissions by 2050. We've completed our greenhouse gas emissions inventory, so we know as a business where our emissions come from. And our next step is to draw a roadmap to reduce these emissions. We've begun including the effects of climate change on our asset planning. I'm looking at coastal inundation, localized flooding from heavy rainfall, and accounting for the increased wind speeds and more erratic and extreme weather patterns that we find in our region. This is adaptation. Nick Carter, who's our network planning manager, has those heavy decisions, difficult decisions to make. Our infrastructure at Electra lasts generally about 50 years. So the decisions we make today are long lasting. And work, such as what is done by Jim and his team, become core to us making wiser and smarter decisions. As climate changes, adaptation and mitigation will become more common terms in society. I mean, pleasantly for Electra, one of the best ways society can mitigate or reduce emissions is through electrification. So moving away from fossil fuel sources such as gas, oil, and coal, and rather electrifying. And that's because New Zealand has a highly renewable energy grid, something that we really should be proud of. I mean, just yesterday, government announced a $2 billion climate infrastructure fund to fast-track our path towards 100% renewable energy. So Electra's in the right space to help our region decarbonize and reduce emissions, something that we really are excited about. I know it's probably difficult to accept, but climate change is here. It's not a problem we can ignore for much longer. So thank you, Jim, for leading such an important piece of work, for opening our minds, for having these hard conversations, which are difficult for us to digest, but digest we must. Your work is very much appreciated. As a token of our gratitude, we'd like to give you a little something to say thank you, a little gift of goodies, which we hope that you'll enjoy. Ladies and gentlemen, can you please give Jim another round of applause?